This is the Multiband Compressor. It was motivated by the arrival of shitty Bluetooth speakers. The original compressor compresses all the frequencies equally. It works fine as long as the speakers are good enough to play all the frequencies in the sound. If the sound has a lot of bass and the speakers only play treble, the original compressor is going to limit based on the bass, and the speakers aren't going to pass anything. The solution is a compressor which compresses different frequencies different amounts. To get a multi-band compressor, we need to attach the compressor multi-effect. The Cinelerra multi-band compressor compresses each band separately and adds them to the output. Traditional multi-band compressors have 4 bands. The first ones had 2 bands. To save space on the interface, we compromised and made it 3 bands. The most the Lion Kingdom has ever used are 2, a bass and a treble band. But 3 is the minimum to have a single pass band while passing through a low band and a high band. We have a traditional compressor interface, except now there are 3 of them. To save space, only 1 band is shown at a time. The items on top change for each band. The items on the bottom stay the same when you change bands. We select the current band edit on top. The bands are ordered from lowest frequencies to highest frequencies. The frequencies spanned by each band are graphed on the bottom. One trick not very useful on the single band compressor, but essential on the multi-band compressor, is the ability to copy the graph to different bands. Right-click on the graph. This gives you a menu with some options to edit the graph. Copy the graph to the clipboard, then select another graph, and paste the graph. Now let's change the frequencies with the frequency pots. For each band, we have a frequency range. The frequency pots are actually shared between neighboring bands. Adjusting band 1's high frequency adjusts band 2's low frequency. Adjusting band 2's high frequency adjusts band 3's low frequency. If you try to set a higher band lower than a lower band, it cuts off the low band. For each band, there is now a solo and a bypass button. The solo button mutes all the other bands except the one band showing. The usual way to use a multi-band compressor is to solo one band at a time, tweak the one band, and then solo the next band. The smooth only button only works if a band is soloed. The bypass button causes the current band to be passed without any changes. Let's solo a band and adjust the frequencies. The steepness adjusts how steep the crossover area is. 0.8 to 0.9 gives values that look like Pro Tools. If the steepness is high enough, the multi-band compressor can behave like a parametric EQ. The window size adjusts how smooth the frequency curve is, but also how far ahead the compressor reads and how responsive it is to the user interface. So we usually keep the window size between 4096 and 8192 samples. Let's configure it to make a song with a very challenging bass track sound loud on a crummy speaker. Playing the song with one band configured to pass all frequencies, we see all the energy is in the bass. When the vocals come in, they won't be heard at all on a crummy speaker if we're limiting the volume to the total sound level of all the frequencies.
Look, you kids with your vintage music coming.
So let's solo the band we want to amplify, and let's put the low frequency at the upper end of the bass track. Make the high frequency the maximum so it ignores the high band. Now we want to amplify everything that's above the bass track and crush it against 0 dB. Make the attack and release 0.1 and 0.2 so it responds quickly. So now we're hardly hearing any of the bass because the pass band is soloed. and when the voice comes in, it's very loud. The narrower the bandwidth of the compressor, the more it's going to amplify, because it has a lot less of the full spectrum to trigger off of. The input meter is especially important in a multi-band compressor. The input meter shows the independent trigger value of each band. As the bandwidth gets narrower, you can see the input value get lower or turn off completely. You can see the gain meter rising as the band gets narrower, as it tries to add more gain to compensate for the band getting narrower. And then as the band gets wider, the gain meter falls. In normal use, we compress the high frequencies where the speaker works and just bypass the low band as shown. All three bands are processed independently and added together to form the output. If you set all three bands to output 0 dB, there is no compensation. The independent compression of the three bands will cause overloading, so some bands have to be held below 0 dB to share the dynamic range.
Look, you kids with your vintage music coming through. Look, you kids with your vintage music coming through.